ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Thank you, Glenn Randall, tonight's judge. I'll give a more of an introduction here in a moment in that, but thank you for joining us tonight. We've had you speak, I know, several times before. I know last year you also judged for our Lone Tree, the Art Center, and that the big.
Yes.
Actually, 2 years ago. It was back 2021, I think you did that. So again, thank you for all your involvement in that over the years and that. We really appreciate everything that you've done for the group.
Most welcome.
And so I'm just going to go through here real quickly, just go through a couple things as far as other events that we have coming up. The first big one I'll say right away is thank you for, again, joining us tonight, Glenn, because I also want to make sure that we promote your program that you have this Saturday. There's still openings for, it's the Master Landscape Photography Workshop. It'll be here at the Lone Tree Civic Center. It's this Saturday morning from 10 a.m. till 5:30. So it's a full day presentation. And I know I was fortunate. I attended one similar to it, I think, that you did here about maybe 5 years ago.
Yep, 5 years ago exactly.
Yeah, I was new to landscape photography at the time, and I know I learned quite a bit from that. So you know, and not just for those who are starting with landscape photography, but also for intermediate and advanced photographers. You'll learn a lot in his workshop. So I highly encourage it for those that can attend. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else to that. I know there's like other materials that you provide there also, and that.
Yes, yeah. So you hit the gist of it. So it'll cover daylight landscape photography. We're not going to talk about night photography, but we'll cover everything from composition to shooting in high contrast light to atmospheric optics, which is the science of how sunlight interacts with our atmosphere, how you can use that to predict where rainbows will appear, and what is gap light, what is glow light, and that sort of information. And we'll talk about panoramas, just depth of field, hyperfocal distance, so a whole wide variety of topics as they relate to daylight landscape photography.
Great. And like I said, that was really beneficial to my learning. I still have a lot to learn, but I learned quite a bit that day in that workshop that you provided. So yeah, again, the registration is out there. I know we put it out on the last email that we sent out with the registration link. And if you don't have that, go to the club's website, and the link is out there as well.
Right. So the link is on my website where you register. And just to add one other point, I do provide an extensive set of handouts, must be 60, 70 pages worth of handouts. So you don't need to feel like you have to frantically scribble notes when you're sitting there in class.
Right. Excellent. And I still have some of those ones from before, but I'm sure you've had a chance to refresh a few of those too in that. So, yes, and they are very, very good resources.
Yes, I update the handouts every year. So yes, this will be the latest and greatest information.
Okay, great. Let's see. So I wanted to make sure I covered that. And let's see here. The next one that we have is 2 weeks from tonight. Darren White, who's also with us here tonight, is doing a presentation. That is Wednesday, November 16th, I believe it is. And this one's going to be on the ins and outs of what you really need to know about night photography. So speaking, from experience of being out there with Darren, you will learn a lot in that presentation as well on that. He, has done night photography workshops for how many years? 10, 12 years in that. So night photography workshops in Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, Oregon, right? Oregon was where I got to experience that, and also out here on the eastern plains of Colorado and that. So again, very accomplished night photographer, and that'll be a really good presentation that we'll have here on November 16th. So 2 weeks from tonight. And then I guess the final meeting that we have is the first Wednesday in December. Are we doing I should know this. Do we have the dinner, the potluck dinner?
Potluck dinner, and then
elections.
I don't know. Our elections were 2 years. We still are on our, because you just got elected last year, correct? So I think it's a non-election year, so people can come and not be afraid to be put on the ballot. I'll be there.
Right, right.
Unless you're somebody jumping ship.
Yeah.
All right. So Chuck, you're in. So. Let's see here. So anyways, those were, again, just the next things that we have here for the year. And then we don't have a second meeting in December just because that starts running up against the holidays and that. So a new set of meetings will show up here for 2023. We'll get those announced here shortly. Again, as I mentioned, thank you tonight, Glenn, for joining us. I just wanted to kind of touch a few things here on that as far as some of your background and accomplishments. Professional photographer for, I have down here 44 years. Is that about right?
43 at this point.
43 at this point. Okay, I was one off.
Yes.
And I guess that there won't be a 44th because, do I understand right that you're retiring at the end of this year?
I'm retiring from teaching workshops,
Okay.
but I'm going to continue, certainly not selling the camera gear, certainly to do my own photography, hope to write articles for Outdoor Photographer, we'll still be selling prints, that kind of thing.
Great. Okay. Congratulations on the semi-retirement, we'll call it.
I'm
that.
rewiring.
Rewiring. Great. Other things that Glenn has done is several books that have been published, some of them through Rocky Nook. I brought one that isn't through Rocky Nook, but it's Sunrise from the Summit. Anybody's welcome to come up here and look at it, but a really good hardback book in there. And a little bit of the story behind this one is, my understanding is, and in reading it, you have summited and got sunrise from each of, 54 14ers here in Colorado?
That's correct.
Yeah, and just in reading through that and that, just again, going through your experiences and so forth, and I'm trying to imagine some of those ones that you've done. I think I mentioned this before at one of the meetings and that, but trying to think about, hiking in the dark, right, to get to some of these places for sunrise. I think about Capitol Peak and the Knife's Edge and some of those things and that. So quite an accomplishment. So a really good book, but this is like one of several that you have out there.
Well, thank you.
Also numerous articles you just mentioned a few minutes ago, Outdoor Photographer. I think I've seen no less than probably 10 or 15 articles that you've had out there with them over the years and that too. So again, quite a bit that you've done. And then also workshops, which like you said, that's the part that you are steering away from. But I know you've had workshops throughout mostly mountain areas within Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah and elsewhere. So with that, again, tonight we have, Glenn will be judging. We're going to go ahead and here in a moment, start moving over towards the competition side of it. I believe we have 80 images altogether.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll go ahead and.
Okay, so this should be Aspen Leaves. This is the first image in beginner intermediate digital color. Great, yeah, so what was intriguing to me about this image was just that swirling circular pattern around the stationary leaves in the middle. I don't know if that was an eddy in a stream, that created that effect, or if this was a digital effect. But that was certainly an interesting take on fall color, or a somewhat different take on fall color. So 7. All right, Autumn Rose. So I kind of understand what the photographer was going for here, those interesting patterns there in the meadow in the front, but the lighting is very flat. The sky is completely bald. So it doesn't add up to anything really compelling. Maybe some texturing side light, if that had been possible, an earlier or later in the day on a clearer day, might have added a lot of life to it. 6. So this one we're just skipping, correct? This is close of day, but the photographer asked us to take it out. This is Baba Temple. Yeah, it's a straightforward portrait of a very intriguing sculpture there. Certainly well lit, well composed, properly exposed. Doesn't have anything beyond that, perhaps, to recommend it. 6. The fun part of this, of course, is that the photographer managed to, impeccable timing to nail that leaf in mid-fall. I don't know how many tries it took to get that leaf, perfectly perfectly in the frame and reasonably sharp. It's a little bit blurry. The problem is that it's one small interesting thing in a much larger image, which has some merit. But I'm going to give it a 6. So Far From Home. So this was, it's certainly an intriguing portrait. We don't see that style of dress very often here in the United States, at least in the places where I hang out. Why she's holding a sign Mali, it raises lots of questions, like, is she posing for tourists? Is she hitchhiking to Mali? How far away is Mali from where this picture was taken? So I just thought it asked lots of questions. It's kind of got dappled light on her face and on the background, which, that's certainly not standard portraiture lighting, but it's kind of intriguing. So we'll call it a 7. Final Rays, this one. So, so the great strength of the image is, of course, that sunburst there through the weathered, beat up barn or home or whatever that is. There's not a whole lot of other things adding to the interest of that image. There's nothing going on in the sky. Going to call it a 6. Follow the Leader. I thought this was just, I know we probably all seen mallards with their ducklings, but I thought this was still well done. The water was very calm, so we get a beautiful reflection of the female mallard's head in the water. Nice V of water. The wake coming out behind her, and all their ducklings, staying in close to sort of draft their mother, if you will, as they're paddling across the lake. So I thought this was quite appealing. Also, the photographer left some room on the right side of the frame. It's nice if the animal has some room to move further into the frame. You wouldn't really want to bump the mallard's nose right up against the right side of the frame. So I think that was appropriate compositional choice. Call that a 7. This, Frozen in Time. This one is, first off, it's a very intriguing subject. Second off, it has it's easy to anthropomorphize about it. Kind of looks like a blue Dementor, with the head of the Dementor here, and then the left arm here and the right arm here, about to snatch up some unwitting photographer. So I just thought this worked really well. An 8. So this image has some problems. If you look closely, you can see there's a lot of kind of modeling in the sky. I guess I can't really go too much larger. And then there's some weird, sort of turquoise edges to these clouds, which I don't think are iridescence. That doesn't quite look like I would have thought iridescence would look like. So I'm hoping these are just digital. These are just JPEG artifacts, but I'd suggest that the photographer go back to the original RAW and maybe edit with a little bit lighter hand and see if they could remove some of these artifacts. So 6. Lotus Glory. I thought this was quite striking. We've all probably heard the advice, don't center the main subject. So a mistake I sometimes see is people shove the main subject off center for no reason that's obvious to the viewer. Here, the photographer moved the subject off center, but it's obvious why. There's lots of interesting, these leaves with their purple and green stripes, radial stripes. I just thought this was really quite effective, very colorful, great use of, well, not quite complementary colors, but certainly the colors really pop off the screen. So I gave this a 9. This is number 12, Moab Sunset. I understand, what the photographer was going for, but unfortunately, there's such a large area of blown out sky back there around the sun that it just kind of kills the image. So the solution to that is, of course, high dynamic range imaging, shoot a bracketed set, 3-frame bracketed set, 2-stop bracketed interval. Maybe in this case, those clouds are so bright, you even need to do a 5-frame bracket set, 2-stop bracket interval, pull them, and then bring all the images into Lightroom, merge them to an HDR file, and then edit. Kudos to the photographer for, catching really quite a tight portrait of this fox. Being the obnoxious critic that I am, I have the luxury of saying, well, gee, why don't you just put the camera a little bit lower and get down to more the eye level with the fox? I think that might have been a little bit more effective. but this still works quite well. Very sharp on the eyes. It's kudos to the photographer for getting the shot, which I'm sure was not easy. So I gave it a 7. Pointing to heaven.
Hey,
Moab Sunset.
the one on the Moab Sunset, we didn't get a score from you on that.
Oh, sorry, 6. Sorry, 6 for Moab Sunset. My bad.
Thank you.
All right, so this is pointing to heaven. Yeah, again, this has some problems digitally. You can see that kind of modeling in the sky and kind of this weird. I'm guessing these are processing artifacts without really knowing. They could be JPEG artifacts, but again, I just suggest the photographer go back to the original RAW and see if they can, edit with a little bit lighter hand and come up with something. Compositionally, it's strong. It's it's an interesting juxtaposition of, the old church and this skyscraper. So there's certainly a lot of potential here. 6. The City That Never Sleeps. Yeah, I liked this a lot. I liked the use of the piers as leading lines, leading your eye into, the skyline there. Presumably this is New York City, at least that's its nickname. I would like to see a little bit more detail in the shadows. The reflections of the piers are kind of blending into the dark foreground. I think a little bit lighter, if it was possible to lighten up the foreground a little bit. I think that'd been an asset, but it's still effective. This kind of shot is easy to shoot too late. If you shoot too late, you see all the lights of the buildings, of course, but you can't see the non-lit portions of the building very well. You want to shoot when there's a little bit of ambient light left, so you still see some of the structure of the buildings and not just the lights within the building. So, which the photographer did. I think they did a good job. That 8. And this one I thought was, very appealing. Got great complementary colors here. The red cap of on this bird, the red crest against those green leaves. It really pops. Kudos to the photographer for being able to see all of the most important parts of the bird. It's really easy in a situation like that to have, some, crucial part of the bird invisible behind a branch, like a branch going right through the bird's eye or something. Clearly the photographer, nailed it and avoided that. So to my mind, this was the best image of the beginner intermediate digital color, and I gave it a 10. Judges Award. All right, shall we just keep blazing through here?
Yes, sir.
All righty, we are now on advanced color. Advanced digital color. Here we go. A Hint of Autumn. The strength of the image is, is that it's an excellent use of complementary colors. Yellow, really pops. That bright yellow really pops against that dark blue background. If it had been possible to get better depth of field, I think that would have been appealing. That may or may not have been possible, given the focal length, etc. 6. And then let's see. This is A Song of Spring. The name, I think, the file name actually says A Song of Spring, but I think it was sorted into Song of Spring. So, I think it's going to be down like around 24 or 25 would be the way you guys presented it. But I renamed it to be the same name as the file name, and that's why it appears here. So anyhow, good composition, catch light in the eye. That's always a plus. Subject stands out well against a very blurry background. A splash of bright color. Certainly, just well composed. Yeah, effective shot. So 7. Autumn Skeletons. Well, it's beautiful color. Great reflection. Excellent timing on the lighting. It's low sun angle. Coming in from the right, really putting great detail in the trunks of the trees in terms of texture, but also giving them form and shape. It's been said the only difference between a sphere and a flat circle is lighting, right? In order to know that that circle is actually a sphere, you need lighting on it, and that's really why this was effective. 7. This is an intriguing image. I certainly wouldn't choose to embarrass myself by guessing what the subject is. Could also just be a synthetic image, created in Photoshop with various gradients and vector tools and stuff like that. But at any rate, it certainly catches your eye, and it's intriguing because it is hard to tell what you're looking at. So 7, Cimarron Sunset. So this is one of the epic locations down in the San Juans for shooting fall color. The easiest way to get there is to park at Owl Creek Pass and walk north for about an hour along Cimarron Ridge. So there's no trail, although maybe people have packed it out now. I mean, there's some game trails and cow trails, but there's really no established trail. So my first thought when I saw this was, well, it's such a great location. How can you miss? And then I thought, well, that's a little unfair to the photographer. First off, it's a lot of effort to get there. 2, they really nailed it compositionally. They nailed it in terms of, the timing of the color on the leaves, the time of day, some interesting clouds, sunset light, the clouds are lighting up. We have the moon over there on the left, luck or skill makes no difference. There was the moon. At least I assume it was not dropped in. So anyhow, I thought this was the strongest image of the advanced digital color. So I gave it a 10, my judge's award. One tiny quibble about this one, if you zoom way in on the right-hand side, you can see that some of these clouds right over here are just on the verge of blowing out. You can't see it, I'm sure, on Zoom, but if you made a 20 by 60 of this, that would be a tiny little issue. But still, that's really an excellent photo. All right, Cottonwood on Clear Creek. It's a pleasant shot. This is the kind of composition that could fail if it was completely clear skies, because you'd have this huge blue hole in the top right corner where nothing interesting was going on. Fortunately for the photographer, there were some interesting clouds up there, which really, added a lot of life to that upper part of the upper right corner of the frame. 6. Hard to evaluate something like this. Certainly, it's. I don't know how much of this was constructed in Photoshop, how much of this was, dolls, with some sort of a mist added either physically or digitally. Certainly it's a fun, spooky image. And my only thought was, gee, it might have been kind of fun if they'd kind of continued the theme by, where down there it says studio name, pictures, presents, if they had actually given the studio a name that was sort of spooky and Halloween themed, name the producers, name the script writer, actor 1, et cetera. 6, Dune Walkers. So, it's certainly, good use of human figures to add a sense of scale. We've all seen lots of photographs of people in the dunes, and I suspect that there would be more interesting dune shapes that could be used. So it also might have benefited from a little bit more contrasty light. This seems like a really flat light. So I'm going to give it a 6. Eagle's Cry. It's a very striking portrait of an eagle, razor sharp, subject pops against that dark background. It's a tough exposure challenge because you got all those white feathers and those black feathers, but the photographer mastered the exposure challenge. You have excellent detail, both the white feathers and the black feathers. Catch light in the eye. It's a strong shot. Definitely a strong shot. 7, Evolution of a Spider Plant Flower. So it's an interesting effort as a studio shot. Certainly, interesting subject. The issue is that there are some mergers of the stem with that black background, particularly here is the most obvious place. So and another down here, again, you have just about have a merger. So it's just a little on the heavy side, and maybe it needed more than one light, to put a little bit, if you had a light to the left, then you could have put a highlight on the left edge of the stem and made it pop against that dark background. 6, Eye onto the Past. So it's kind of a pastime of mine to try to figure out where people shoot the photos that they present in these competitions. And then also to kind of figure out, how did they do that? Just aesthetically, I mean, obviously, you got people actually a number of people silhouetted against that Milky Way there. I'm pretty sure this is North Window in Arches National Park. Overall, I think it's a bit too dark for my taste. I think it would kind of die as a print on somebody's wall. And I may be out of my lane here, but I'm guessing that that part of the Milky Way is never visible through North Window from that side of the arch. But I haven't tried to calculate the geometry closely, but I have photographed the Milky Way. So anyhow, that may or may not matter to the photographer. They may have just thought, well, this is a cool looking image. So that's what they made. 6, Ferris wheel. So, the strength of the image is, of course, it's cool to see lighted up, rides, amusement park rides against a dark sky. To my mind, though, there's just too much clutter in the frame that distracts from the main subject. The main subject is really the Ferris wheel, and then there's just a whole lot of other stuff in there that's kind of blocking our view of the Ferris wheel. So 6, Foxy Loxy. This is just a classic portrait, sharp from tip of tail to tip of nose, and the falling snow adds mood. The warm tone fox stands out against that dark background. It's a good pose. Just nicely done, very nicely done. So 7. Futuristic. So it's the great strength of it is all those strong diagonal lines leading your eye into the frame, creating that sense of depth. It's that railroad track perspective. It's also the photographer obviously paid close attention to composition. I think they positioned the top of this lighted tower nicely in between these lines. If they'd been just even 2 feet left or 3 feet right, I think the composition would have been quite a bit less interesting. So yeah, strong image. 7. All right, so this is haunting. The strength of this image is, this apparently abandoned building that the photographer presumably placed red lights inside, and did a good job of lighting it. So you have some detail in the building as well as in the lit interior. So it's cool. A more interesting sky would have added quite a bit to the strength of the image. So 6, Into the Mist. To my mind, this was an intriguing idea that kind of almost worked. There's just too much mist at the bottom, and so we could lose a little bit off the bottom, obviously, just crop it. And then it's just so misty and flat in the upper part that it would have been even more intriguing if it had been possible to get, some branches and trees that were, free of the mist, that were really sharp. But it's still, good. Kudos to the photographer for seeing this potential here and trying to work with it. 6, Layers and Light. See now, okay, yeah. I'm just going to see if I can. Oh darn it! Let's see here. Yeah, I tried to hide my video panel, but it's not letting me do that, so I will not worry about it. So layers and light. This is what I call a stacked ridges shot, and I actually think it works well. A lot of stacked ridges shots are just kind of bland, but this to me worked better because you have some warm color there in the top left corner of the frame. And then you also have some splashes of sunset light on this ridge down here and also this ridge here. So I gave it a 7. Night lights. There's, very strong sense of mood here, great sense of depth, these steps leading your eye down. It's often been said that we like photographs that kind of invite exploration. And this kind of does invite exploration, but also with trepidation. It looks very spooky. like, if you really want to walk down these empty flight of stairs by yourself at midnight, kind of a feeling. And then the contrast of the warm light on the street lights here on the stairs with the deep blue in of the rest of the city is also adds to the appeal. One thing I noted, which I thought was intriguing, was that there's a strong shadow line here. So I'm just wondering what cast the light that lit this so well, and what blocked the light from here. Since it's a night scene, it's like, that's interesting. Just intriguing, not necessarily a flaw. I gave this an 8. Preen in S formation. So it's just a classic portrait, well composed. Subject stands out against that dark background. The pose is very appealing. The photographer barely held detail in those white feathers. I think there's enough, but if you tried to print that, you would be on the verge of losing some of those highlights, I think. 7. Reflections of fall. Yeah, so good use of spotlighting, meaning the clouds are breaking up or gathering, and there's a shaft of sun coming through and spotlighting that colorful hillside. A little bit of light also on the left-hand hillside. So that that certainly adds to the appeal. On the other hand, it looks like it's about to rain. Now maybe it just stopped raining, of course, but that leaden sky, I think, would probably kill the appeal of this image as a print for somebody's wall. 6. So I strongly consider making this my judges award in this category. Just great timing on that wild splash. It's a very intriguing subject. You wonder, where's all that water going? Obviously flowing back out to the sea, but it's just a very intriguing, long exposure, perfect, beautiful blur in both the splash and in the water flowing into the sinkhole. And then to cap it all off, the splash is, silhouetted against that very dark blue sky. But then it's not all dark blue sky. You've got that, what looks to be rain clouds out there at the horizon, lighting up golden at sunset. So I thought this was very strong. I gave it a 9. When I first looked at this image, I thought, wait a minute, is this upside down? Because I'd always thought that jellyfish, floated with their tendrils, tentacles down below them. But I looked up some photos of sea nettles, and apparently they float in this, orientation as well as with the tentacles facing down. So it's a great use of complementary colors. Obviously, a very intriguing subject. Nicely composed. I gave it a 7. So this is the image called "She Thinks My Tractor Is Sexy," which obviously means that implies to me that the photographer thought that the tractor was a really important part of the composition, and yet the tractor is rendered pretty small in the frame there below Wilson Peak, taken up on Wilson Mesa. So my thought was, well, if that's really, we're probably not getting the message that the photographer was trying to send as clearly as we could. I think maybe just getting closer to the tractor and recomposing so the tractor is larger in the frame, might have made the meaning of the photo more clear. 6. Showing off. Well, obviously very good timing, great wing position. The bird mostly stands out against the dark background. There's a little bit of a merger here on the back of the bird's head, I think, where those darker feathers are merging with the dark background. And the photographer is right on the verge of losing those feathers there, which would be certainly a drawback in a print, because it'd be harder to hold detail there than on a screen. So 6. Stormy evening. So, obviously, heavy drama in the sky, a last little splash of warm light on the foreground, so that certainly adds a lot of drama to the scene. But I guess my feeling is that there's just not enough interest in the foreground grasses to really sort of carry the shot. So, at least not to make it stand out in this group of images. So I gave it a 6. Transparent flight. This was another image I really strongly consider for a judge's award. When you zoom in on this image, it's sharp, wingtip to wingtip or very close. Great composition, perfect wing position. The bird is very colorful, of course, stands out strongly against that dark background. I just thought this was, an excellent shot. So I gave it a 9. Wabi Sabi. So this is kind of a straightforward waterfall shot, nice blur in the water, but nothing that really makes it stand out, in this group of images. So I gave it a 6. And then finally, Whispering Leaves. The difficulty with this kind of shot, and I've run into the same problem, is, why this group of aspen? Why not walk 10 feet left or 15 feet right or 30 feet, past that? What is it about this group of trees that made the photographer decide, okay, this is what I'm going to shoot, as opposed to a different group of trees? So I know it's not always possible. In fact, maybe it doesn't happen very often, but you need to try to find something that makes it clear to the viewer, this is why I shot this composition. The other thing is that there's a weird splash of red in the top right corner, which I really don't know where that came from. That would not be something typical in an aspen grove. So maybe the photographer wants to look at what happened up there. Okay, so that is it for.
Score for
I
that.
guess
we
that
need-
is-
Glenn, we need a score for the last one.
Oops, sorry, 6.
Okay.
All right, so we're now on beginner intermediate monochrome.
Yes.
Okay, let's see here. Let me get this back into. There we are. Okay, so now we're back in alphabetical order. I hope the others were in alphabetical order. I just noticed that this one was not.
As long
any-
as we get the image title, it doesn't matter.
Okay, very good, very good. I think that they were in order. In fact, I'm pretty sure they must have been. They must have been in alphabetical order. All right, image number 1, Adobe Church. Certainly, graphically very strong image. We got strong diagonals. We've got interesting subject. Letting the sky go, essentially pure black. I think works well against this bright sunlit adobe. Yeah, I suppose it'd be nice to there was something a little more interesting in the top left corner, but sometimes that's the way the cookie crumbles. So we'll give it a 7. I thought this was just a charming photograph of this this girl, playing with all the bubbles or chasing bubbles. Nicely composed. There's no bubble like right over her face or something. There's no bubble over her hand. That I think that would also have been a drawback. She stands out well against the background. Just a lot of fun. So I gave this the Judges Award, a score of 10. This is quite an effective portrait. Good lighting. It's kind of backlit, so with some reflected light on her face, so it's not harsh light on her face. Yeah, concentration is certainly a good name for it. The photographer, basically held detail in the hair with a few exceptions of very bright highlights there. So yeah, well done, well done. 7. This image has a lot of technical problems. You can see, maybe you can't see very well, but there's a lot of blotchiness in the sky. So I hope that's just a JPEG artifact, but the photographer needs to go back to the original RAW and edit with a lighter hand and see if they can figure out what went wrong. 6. Iceland waterfall. This is kind of one of those, oh my God, places that it's like, what an amazing spot. It's a little hard to miss, but the photographer did it well. I like the way that they caught, I think it was an appropriate exposure because they kind of caught those surges of water coming down, with enough blur to make it feel like falling water. But if they'd gone with a really long exposure, it would all just have sort of turned into smoke. So I think this worked well. Nicely composed. Up at the very top, I might have included a little bit more of the cliff face, but still very strong. 8. Impressions of a city. I like this a lot. It's a very creative interpretation of a city. Presumably this was, long exposure where the photographer zoomed the lens during the exposure. But it really kind of needs some cropping. The bottom part of the frame is just kind of dark and muddy and you don't really know what's going on. And there's a big hole up here in the top right corner. So I would have, cropped it down quite a bit, maybe something more like that. But still, it's still it's a cool shot, great idea, well executed. 7. Let's go swimming. If this was just a shot of a dog swimming across a pond and, there was just turbulent water all around the dog, it could have been a nice shot. But I think what kind of makes this is the dog is swimming quickly enough across a very calm pond that you get that beautiful reflection of the dog's head, and eyes and nose and ears in the water. And that just adds a lot of appeal to my eyes. It's a well executed black and white, appropriate range of tones. I gave it a 9. This, looks like a drone shot. Presumably this is a drone shot. Mountain Valley Snake, it's called. To me, the shot is this right here. Those are the most interesting curves. And having that road in there, maybe it's just because I'm kind of a wilderness guy, kind of kills it for me. I also think just graphically, it'd just be more interesting to, to crop it something like that. But still, they had the right idea, to capture that really interesting meander. 6. On the old Pecos Trail. It's kind of a straightforward portrait of what may or may not be an open restaurant. There's not really much going on in the whole top left quarter of the frame. There's a couple of clouds, but it's really not too compelling. I just wonder if maybe there was a better way to, instead of sort of standing back and shooting, maybe to have got, and shooting the whole thing, maybe to have gotten closer, picked out details. 6. The river Styx. So it's hard to find a river here, although I guess it's supposed to be kind of in the center. I have a feeling that it was a deliberate blur or maybe just handheld and that's the way it came out. But I don't know that the blur is really working in the photographer's favor here. It kind of looks like, the camera was stable for most of the exposure, but then the last portion of the frame, the camera moved and recorded like that edge there and that edge there. And so to my mind, at least, it doesn't look like evocative and creative. It just kind of looks more like a mistake. 6. 2 heads are better than one. This is kind of a puzzler as photographs go, because it's, clearly abstracted from any kind of background. And then we don't even see the whole giraffe coming down to the edge of the frame down here, at the bottom of the frame. So kind of looks like a digital composite of 2 separate shots of giraffe, maybe. So it's intriguing. You really have to kind of look at it twice to realize, oh, really, there are 2 giraffe heads there. And it's because it is kind of intriguing, I gave it a 7. Watching. Yeah, so it certainly captures that mood of watching. And kudos to the photographer for realizing that, cropping to just a very intense, one eye, the snout, the whiskers, would make it more effective. 6. All right, ruthlessly efficient here tonight. We are on advanced monochrome. And we are in alphabetical order. So this is above the waves. It's an intriguing image for sure. Either drone shot or straight down from a bridge or something. Because it does kind of puzzle you and make you wonder exactly what you're looking at, what the scale is, how big are those waves? Are we talking inches or feet or yards? It's hard to tell. There isn't really any kind of a center of interest to it. As your eye just kind of wanders around the whole frame, wondering where your eye should land and what the central focus or central subject is. 6, Black Mesa. So the strength of this image is that glorious sky, well edited, black and white, very dramatic, very graphic. Black Mesa, a moderately interesting butte. You do have good texturing sidelight on it, and then you have what probably looks like a church there at the bottom, but it's so small, it's a little, it looks like in a graveyard. I suspect if it was possible, now maybe this is all private land, if it was possible to get a lot closer, make the church and the graveyard much more prominent, you could give Ansel Adams a run for his money with Moonrise over Hernandez. But as it is, I gave it a 6. Century-old headlights. Well, clearly, the headlight itself is very interesting. Just that pattern, of, I don't know, the lens over the headlight or whatever it is that's giving us that intriguing shape. And I imagine the photographer wanted to include enough context. You realized it was a car, which is, a good thought. In some ways, it could be even more intriguing just to crop down even tighter to the headlight itself. Probably would have made it more abstract, and maybe that's just a different idea. 6, Coastal Rain. So this one just, I had a very strong emotional reaction to this scene. Water flowing, that much water flowing that fast, just so much power. It just looks so dark and ominous. You think, oh my God, can you imagine trying to float a kayak down that? It'd just be terrifying. And then, the Virga, the falling rain, up in the upper half of the upper third of the frame. It's just a very strong, wild, mood to my mind. So I gave this one the Judges Award in this category, a 10. Dahlia Whisper. Yeah, really, we haven't seen a whole lot of this kind of, very high key black and white photographs. I thought this was quite well done, nice and sharp. It almost looks like a pencil drawing. So it's an intriguing take on this flower. It's obviously well composed. Yes, it's centered, but it has to be centered. How could you move it out of center without making it look weird? So I gave it a 7. Don't worry, be happy. So I have to admit, I had to look at it for a second or two to sort of pick up, yes, smile, nose, eyes, etc. Kind of nose. But yeah, kudos to the photographer for coming up with the title. And, it's a well executed black and white. It looks like, well, to take a wild guess, some pretty heavy digital manipulation to give it that much grungy texture. Photomatics details enhancer, would be one possible tool for making something like that. But I think Topaz has similar tools. So, excuse me, I gave it a 7. Down by the River, kind of sepia toned, black and white. I thought looking at this was kind of similar to what a shot some distance back. It's like, well, why this piece of river? Why not a piece of river, 100 yards downstream or 100 yards upstream? There wasn't really anything about this particular stream that made me think, okay, yeah, this is why the photographer shot this piece of stream. I do see the bridge there, of course, but it's not really a very prominent part of the frame. 6. First light. To my mind, it's just a little too dark. The top of the bird stands out well against the background, but we're definitely starting to get mergers over here and, to some extent down here where, the dark feathers are kind of blending against the dark background. The subject doesn't really pop against that dark background. 6. Gloomy morning. Well, yeah, I think that mist in the trees with the light coming through is really cool. But that's the shot. Right there is the shot. This really wind rippled lake is not really adding to the strength of the image. These kind of weedy grasses down here are not adding. I always tell my students, drill down to the essence of your idea. Perfection is achieved not when nothing more can be added, but when nothing more can be taken away. So I would have just made it that. And I think that would have been a stronger image. 6. Harvest hay. Well, the photographer, had an idea. They did a fine job shooting the idea. Obviously what was intriguing was, that pattern. It looks like, 3 of those big circular hay bales, stacked against each other. But I'm afraid it's just not quite a strong enough subject to really soar as an image. 6. Home on the range. Well, it's a great sky, obviously. Those dramatic clouds, pond, barn, I guess is probably what that is. Snow-capped peak, first snow on the peaks in the background. So it's, it has quite a bit of merit. It's probably all private property, so you probably could not walk over to the pond. If you could have, that would have potentially added quite a bit of interest if you could have gotten a reflection. But judges, of course, can imagine the impossible. So I gave it a 6. Land of the Lost. Well, the strength of the image is that the photographer worked very hard on composition and did a good job. So we have this leading line takes your eye back to that tower. We got a lot of drama in the sky. I'm just not sure that the subject itself is quite interesting enough to really make it soar. So I gave it a 6. This is another stacked ridges shot that I don't think worked quite as well as the one we saw in the color category, because obviously it's monochrome, there's no color, and so the only thing you've got going for you is the shapes themselves. So this is called layers, and it needed something, more dramatic peaks, more dramatic ridges, a better sense of rhythm in the way the ridges lined up behind each other, something. 6. Lone bison. Yeah, it's a good, kind of workmanlike shot of bison against that tree. Suppose you could argue maybe the contrast is a little bit flat for a really effective black and white, but it is, soft, snowy scene. So too much contrast would probably look kind of fake. Yeah, the photographer had a good idea, executed it pretty well. Be nice if the bison were doing something more interesting than grazing. 6. This I thought worked really well. I don't know if the way the flower kind of glows is a product of the way it was lit or a product of the way it was edited or both, but I think it was an effective treatment. And so it just makes for a very intriguing portrait of this flower. Yeah, photographer did very well. I gave it an 8. Here's my biometrics. Yeah, it's a fun portrait. Presumably this is zebra stripes. Kudos to the photographer for getting, everything sharp. In other words, the plane, the zebra was basically parallel to the plane of the sensor. So I'm sure that took some good timing. I'm not sure how you could do it better exactly, but it didn't really stand out in my mind. 6, purple haze. Yeah, it's another image. You don't really know what the subject is, or maybe it's just a synthetic image, just created in Photoshop from a blank screen, a blank file. Um, the problem with that I have with it compositionally is that some of the most important elements are basically touching the edge of the frame, like up here at the top, and then again down here at the bottom, which in my mind is kind of a compositional no-no. You either want to include something cleanly like you planned it that way, or cut it off cleanly like you planned it that way. But letting things just sort of touch the edge of the frame generally looks like you just didn't really pay attention to the edges of your frame. 6, railroad line. So it actually took me a moment to realize what the photographer had done. Basically, they crouched way down by the left hand of these two rails. So it didn't immediately read railroad tracks to me. It also has some significant depth of field issues, which I think is a drawback from my perspective. I'd like to see the foreground sharp front to back. It's a classic situation where tilt shift lens would work, should the photographer ever want to go reshoot it. And then the sky has some interest in it, but an awful lot of it is pretty close to white. So 6, spellbound. Yeah, it certainly has a bit of a mood to it, which is certainly appealing. There's a lot of the frame that's not really adding a whole lot to the strength of the image, particularly the bottom right corner. Didn't quite come together for me. 6, storm at the dunes. Well, this was a very strong contender for a judge's award here. I just really liked the texture. Some photographers or artists call this a texture gradient, where you have all of these ripples that get closer and closer and closer together as you go farther and farther into the frame. Kind of really strongly enhances the sense of depth. I'm guessing this is Great Sand Dunes, although I'm not sure. Then you have, Great Sand Dunes are notorious for these spectacular lenticular clouds, and we certainly have some strong examples of these sort of stacked lenticulars there, which are very dramatic clouds. And I think it's just well edited, black and white. So I gave it a 9. The corridor. Clearly the photographer had the right idea. Use the stream as the leading line. Take your eye back to that peak back there. And I guess that's Marcelino Mountain, Kevlar Pass, but that's just a guess. I guess what I felt was maybe not as strong is, the shadows like in these trees here are really dark. Like they're really kind of blocking up. I'd like to have seen a little bit more detail in the trees. Probably a little more detail in those clouds, some of which are right on the verge of blowing out. So I gave it a 6. The Next Generation. Yeah, this was, I thought, a very well edited black and white, just intriguing. Yes, I know you could argue, okay, which is the main subject, but it still worked to me better than some of the other things we've worked with, maybe because the photographer put a vignette on it, or maybe that's just the way the lighting was, but it really kind of focused your eye on the center of the frame, all those wonderful wisps and things. Really quite good depth of field. Given the subject, yeah, so well done. 7. The Stair. Yeah, it's a good portrait. Maybe not as strong as that other portrait of just the head of an eagle we saw, but kudos to the photographer for getting good detail in both the feathers and in the the white feathers and the black feathers. Pretty high contrast subject. kind of tough thing to shoot. Very out of focus background. So yeah, so well done. 7. And Topsy Turvy. This kind of looks like a drawing by M.C. Escher. I don't know if the photographer just flipped it upside down just for fun, because, like this plant is obviously upside down, the stairs are upside down, but certainly it's a very intriguing idea. Makes you look twice. You keep looking at it, trying to figure it out. It's well composed with, these lines all concentric without quite overlapping, which I think is, was ideal. I don't know if this is a real place or not, or just an M.C. Escher drawing, but certainly a fun shot. So I gave it an 8. And that is the last one.
Great, thank you.
You are welcome.
Chuck, do you have the results or?
Yeah. Are we back?
Really?
on
So
that?
did the members ever agree with me on which ones?
We're about to find out.
All right. Very good.
Chuck has the results of those
Chuck
right
will
now.
go through the results.
All right, so we're gonna start with beginner, intermediate, color. For the judges award was Good, Jane Richards. First place, The City That Never Sleeps, Susan Langer. Second place, On the Hunt, Bruce Ryman. Third place, Final Raise by Carolyn Ryman. And honorable mention, Lotus Glory by Jane Richards. Good job, everybody. No, not everybody's here. Advanced Digital Color. The Judges Award went to Cimarron Sunset, Pete Rondinone. First place went to Rise and Fall, Storm Surge, Darren White. Second place, Ion to the Past, Carino Zaragoza. Third place, Sea Nettles, Ben Evans. And honorable mention, Stormy Evening, Michael Rhino. Intermediate digital mono. First place, Impressions of a City, Susan Langer. Second place, and the Judges Award, Chasing Bubbles, Aaron McConnell. Third place, Concentration, Jane Richards. Honorable mention, Adobe Church, also by Jane Richards. And then Advanced Digital Mono. First place, Topsy Turvy, Dave Purcell. Second place, Storm at the Dunes, Darren White. Third place, and the Judges Award, Coastal Rain, Darren White. And honorable mention, Midnight Lotus, Kathy Sneed.
Good.
We're gonna have
You wanna run
chance.
through all the images and say who's good work?
I don't have the names here.
I do.
He's got the names.
Yep.
So we don't have the names?
That's,
Chuck
Chuck has the names.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
Bring them up. Bring up the.
We're gonna run through and say who did what.
It goes real quick. Yeah, just.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good.
It was just apartment building in Budapest.
Okay, this is advanced color.
Oh, you already started advanced?
Well, you got the list there, that's right.
Go to beginner digital. Or beginner color. Sorry.
It was weird that there were like 3 different layers.
Yeah. Alright, Aspen Leaves, Aaron McConnell. Autumn Rose, Bruce Ryman. Close of the Day, Susan Langer. Desara, Denver, Baba Temple, Vinoa Rajan. Falling Leaf, Gary Hubble. Far From Home, Kathy Bela. Final Raise, Carolyn Ryman. Follow the leader, also Carolyn. Frozen in Time, Kathy Bela. Gore, Jeff Scott. Lotus Glory, Jane Richards. Moab Sunset, Aaron McConnell. On the Hunt, Bruce Ryman. Pointing to Heaven, Jeff Scott. The City That Never Sleeps, Susan Langer. I'm Good, Jane Richards. Advanced color. A Hint of Autumn, Keith Thurman. Autumn Skeletons, Jeff Woodard. Blue and Orange Study, Jim Stambaugh. Cimarron Sunset, Pete Rondinone. Cottonwood on Clear Creek, Kathy Sneed. Don't Be Scared, Corey Baumgartner.
Of course.
Dunewalkers, John Marriott.
He's great.
Eagles Cry, John Baumgartner. Evolution of a Spider Plant Flower, Jim Stambaugh. Eye into the Past, Carino Zaragoza. Ferris Wheel, Keith Thurman. Foxy Loxy, Ben Evans. Futuristic, Dave Purcell. Haunting, Matt Gates. Into the Mist, Jeff Woodard. Layers in Light, Darren White. Nightlights, Dave Purcell. Preen in the S Formation, Corey Baumgartner. Reflections of Fall, Matt Gates. Rise and Fall, Darren White. Sea Nettles, Ben Evans. She Thinks My Tractor's Sexy, Chuck Rasco. Showing Off, Michael Rhino. Song of Spring, Kathy Sneed. Stormy Evening, Michael Rhino. Transparent Flight, John Baumgartner. Wabi Sabi, Peter Rondon. Whispering Leaves, Carino Zaragoza. Beginner mono. Adobe Church, Jane Richards. Chasing Bubbles, Aaron McConnell. Concentration, Jane Richards. Gore, Jeff Scott. Iceland Waterfall, Aaron McConnell. Impressions of a City, Susan Langer. Let's Go Swimming, Carolyn Ryman. Mountain Valley Snake, Bruce Ryman. On the Old Pecos Trail, Kathy Bela. The River Styx, Susan Langer. Two Heads Are Better Than One, Carolyn Ryman. Watching, Bruce Ryman. Above the Waves, Corey Baumgartner. Black Mesa, Dave Purcell. Century Old Headlights, John Baumgartner. Coastal Rain, Darren White. Dahlia Whisper, Kathy Sneed. Don't Worry, Be Happy, Carino Zaragoza. Down by the River, Keith Thurman. First Light, John Baumgartner. Gloomy Morning, Michael Rhino. Harvest Hay, John Marriott. Home on the Range, Chuck Rasco. My Biometrics, Corey Baumgartner. Land of the Lost, Jeff Woodard. Lair, also by Jeff. Lone Bison, Michael Rhino. Midnight Lotus, Kathy Sneed. Purple Haze, Jim Stambaugh. Railroad Line, Keith Thurman. Spellbound, Peter Rondenon. Storm at the Dunes, Darren White. Corridor, Matt Gates. The Next Generation, Karina Zaragoza. The Stair, Matt Gates. And Topsy Turvy, Dave Purcell.
Good job, everybody.
Yeah.
Glenn, thank you very much for doing that. And then again, for those of you in the room and online, if there's openings for his class on Saturday,
You bet.
it's his farewell song. So
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. As there still are openings, and thank you for doing that, Glenn. And thank you very much for the great commentary tonight. Too. Every time we do one of these things, it's nice to have different perspectives and
Sure.
and like I think you used the word that you were very efficient or whatever the term you used there and so forth. But in that time that you did, it was you used that 30 seconds per image very well in that in terms of giving good. Giving good real tips and so forth in that. So thank you again very much for doing that.
Oh, you're most welcome. You're most welcome. Yep. I even got you out of there before the police arrived.
Yeah, we're still we still have a few extra minutes, so that was real helpful. So again, yeah, the workshop this Saturday, and the other thing I was going to mention too, real quick, is I know we had a few new members that just joined here in the last couple of months, and that we actually have had more than that, but there were some that weren't on the distribution list. So apologies to if a few of you, I don't know if any of them are online or not, but by the time we got that corrected and got the email out, it was already past, I guess, the deadline to submit images. But that is corrected now, so hopefully you'll get all the emails. Hopefully you'll get all the emails here going forward and so forth. So, but
and Glenn, I'll be the one coming to the meeting on Saturday. I'll be the guy opening the doors and stuff. So you email me what time you want to be there and all that stuff.
Yes, yeah, we need to get the last minute details nailed down, but yeah, it's under control, I'm sure.
Okay.
I'll be in touch.
yeah, I would have signed up, but I had another commitment that day.
No problem.
So,
No
but
problem.
encourage everybody to attend.
I signed up,
Understood.
but I can't go. But if anybody wants to go, they can take my spot.
There you go.
Free.
It's like a door prize. Free.
Door prize.
Right.
All right.
All right, great. Thank you again, Glenn, and wish everybody a good time here this Saturday morning.
Most welcome. Most welcome. You guys had a lot of great images tonight.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.